You know, every once in a while, I'll hop on D&D subreddits and answer random people's questions about tabletop RPGs, and I came across a question that went something like this. Now, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but essentially, a player was wandering around a city investigating something and rolled poorly. The Dungeon Master said as a joke, all you find is a stray kitty cat, and the player thought it was cute and decided to keep it. So the Dungeon Master took to Reddit and asked, what crazy thing should he make this cat? What surprise twist could he toss at his player? Should he make it a druid stuck in his wild shape? Make it an ancient being who is cursed? Make it the cat of a rich nobleman who will take his revenge out on the party? Or should it be any number of other wacky ideas? Now, I could tell this Dungeon Master was set on the idea of making this cat something grander, so I gave him a few suggestions on how to do so. But I ended my reply with, sometimes a cat can just be a cat. Because twists can be fun for sure, but how many twists is too many? When should you implement twists, and what is the point of even having them? Well, hello, my name is Matt, and welcome to my hidden nerdy side, and today we are going to talk about making twists in Dungeons & Dragons and any other tabletop RPG. So think about all the crazy twists you've seen in movies, books, video games, tabletop streams, and all that jazz. What was happening before the twist, and what happened afterwards? For example, let's say our hero is after a serial killer and will do anything to stop her, even if it means killing her. But as the story goes on, our hero finds out the serial killer is his daughter. And now instead of doing absolutely everything to try and stop the killer, our hero now has an internal struggle he needs to deal with. He needs to reflect on his duties as a hero and ask himself if saving his daughter is even worth it. And if she is, he now has to think about how he can possibly try to save her from her murderous ways and stop her without having to resort to death. So to boil it down in its most basic form, a twist is an element added to your story or game in the context of D&D that changes the expected outcome of something. Looking back at our previous example, we expected the hero to defeat the serial killer by any means necessary. But then we found out the serial killer is his daughter, and so that outcome has changed to the hero trying to save his daughter from the dark path she walks. So that's what twists do and why you use them. And now that we've established that, before you add any twists to your games, ask yourself, what are you trying to change? What happens if you change it? And is the change worth it? So let's take a look at our previous suggestion for the cat I mentioned earlier. Let's say this cat is actually the prized possession of a rich and ornery nobleman, and he's been looking for this cat everywhere. What are you trying to change with this twist? Maybe you're just trying to change the party's awareness of our nobleman's very existence so you can possibly introduce more storylines involving him later on. Maybe you're trying to set up how valuable and sought after cats are in this particular part of your world, and this twist is simply a way to aid in that world building. Maybe you're trying to change the opinion the party has of our nobleman and vice versa to a more negative one by having your party quote-unquote steal his cat, and this is actually the introduction to a potential new villain in your campaign. Let's say we go with the first one and third one mashed together, and say your noble villain stumbles upon the party in the street and they have his cat. He freaks out and demands to have it back, or he'll use his connections to have your party thrown in jail. So when we look at the next step, which is what happens when we make our change, well, currently, probably nothing much. The way I see it, most players would simply say, sorry, we didn't know, and give it back, because why wouldn't they? As is, on its own, this would be a pretty whatever twist, because it's not really going to accomplish much, and after they give his cat back, there's no conflict. Your players might not like the nobleman's attitude, but that's kind of it. So how do we make our twist so it can inspire player engagement? Well, what if your players found the cat and saw it was bruised, limping, malnourished, and overall in horrible condition? If you have any pet lovers in your party, they may not want to give his cat back because it's been treated so poorly. What if his cat fits the exact description of a cat an NPC your players really liked mentioned she lost years ago. Well, your players might want to return it to her instead. Or maybe cats for some reason carry an insanely high value on the black market, like 10,000 gold or something outrageous. Well, then angering a nobleman and trying to escape the city might be worth it. For our scenario, let's go with a cat being treated poorly. And with that, we finally have to ask ourselves, is this twist worth it? Sure, your players may be pet lovers and want to save our cute little kitty, but is that all this potential series of encounters has to offer? Because if so, maybe it's not worth it. But this really depends on how you see your nobleman factoring into your game, because if his sole reason for existing is to introduce a cat-saving encounter, then I'd say probably not. But what if this encounter leads to something really important down the line? For example, what if our nobleman was on your main big bad's payroll, and several sessions later, your players will run into our nobleman at a party? If the players gave him his cat back, he will help your players socialize, make connections, and figure out whatever craziness you have planned at your party without realizing he's working against his boss. But if your players don't give him his cat back, he will do whatever he can to hinder them. Also, what if your players were already on a quest to find and stop a secret animal abuser working for your big bad, and this chance encounter was a way to give your players a massive hint. And with your hint, your players can now do a more narrow and pointed investigation of our nobleman, figure out where he lives, sneak into his place to find out more intel on your big bad, and all that good stuff. Now, this is a twist that can actually be worthy of putting in your game. Is it the most shocking twist of all time? No, but it serves its purpose and keeps your game going. However, the reality is, everything doesn't have to be something bigger. Not everything in your game needs to lead to something grander, and in fact, it's much better that way. Yes, twists are important and can add a lot to your game, but when you add too many twists, your players can start to get exhausted. And like that famous saying from The Incredibles, when everyone is super, no one will be. If every single thing in your game leads to something grander and there's nothing mundane at all, then your twists will start to overload your players and they won't be able to truly appreciate them. And it will also make putting future twists in your game more difficult because your players will always be on alert. So ask yourself, before adding a twist, when was the last time you added one? If you just added something pretty crazy, then maybe hold off for a little bit, because the mundane is not only important for helping the special moments feel more special, but also these little mundane moments, like finding a cute kitty cat, are what make your world feel real. These little moments are what make your player characters stand out and form an identity. These little moments give your players insight into their fellow party members and allow them to bond. And sure, after your campaign is long and done, your players will remember the odd, insane twist and epic fight, but they'll also remember the time they made some random cat their party mascot. So the final question you have to ask yourself whenever you add a twist is, what doesn't get to happen now that you've put it in your game? When evaluating something's worth, you have to ask yourself, what did it cost you? Sometimes you need a twist to elevate your game, and they can absolutely make your players become even more invested in your world. But sometimes you could be missing the little moments that define your campaign and make it truly special. Sometimes a cat can just be a cat, because a twist should add to your game, not take away from it. And if you can remember that, well, you'll be one step closer to being a better game master.